We're about to begin our session titled In Conversation with H M Naqvi, author of Abdullah the Cossack. Please switch off your mobile phones or put them on silent mode. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the discussion. We would appreciate it if complete silence is observed while the session is in progress. Our moderator for this session is George Fulton. He's a British Pakistani television journalist and producer who has over 18 years' experience in public relations, television production, and broadcast journalism. George Fulton has overseen external communication roles for the British Council, the Qatar Foundation, and the Atlantic Partnership. He has also been the executive producer, writer, and presenter of television programs in Pakistan, including Kiran Aur George and George Ka Pakistan. He has produced Hard Talk Pakistan and Question Time Pakistan for BBC World News. He currently runs a digital content platform called Desi George and works for Indus News. Are we ready, George? Yes.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am particularly honored to introduce our speaker and his work today. H M Naqvi is a novelist whose debut novel, Homeboy, was a bestseller and the winner of the inaugural DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. The New York Times described Homeboy as a remarkably engaging novel that delights as it disturbs. A graduate of literature and economics from Georgetown University, in a previous life, Mr. Naqvi worked for the World Bank and the financial services industry. Thankfully for us, he escaped that purgatory and began to sit in classes at Harvard's English department, pretending to be a student. Subsequently, he attended the creative writing program at Boston University and was invited to teach writing there afterwards, whilst he worked on his first novel. Mr. Naqvi has been writing since the age of 6 and says, if you write a good story, your audience is anybody who likes a good story. Ladies and gentlemen, H M Naqvi. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with his latest work, The Selected Works of Abdullah the Cossack, Mr. Naqvi hasn't written a good story, but a great story. And I would like him to invite him to read a passage now from the novel.
George, thank you for such a generous introduction. It's wonderful that we will be in conversation together because I also have been acquainted with your work for some time, and who better to be in conversation with than a fellow denizen of Karachi now. Ladies and gentlemen, the protagonist of Abdullah the Cossack is one 300-pound, hemorrhoid-ridden diabetic who wakes up one morning realizing that he's turned the ripe old age of 70, and consequently considers launching himself off his balcony. But before we chat about the story and the modalities of writing, I thought, what better way to get into the character's head than sort of share his voice with you. And so Abdullah writes, my head is like a rubbish heap. You have to sift through the muck to find a working toaster. When I was 11, I overheard one of my brothers telling another that I am a bastard. They say if you scale the bluff by Shah Nurani, you happen upon the clenched mouth of a cave, and if you manage to crawl in, you are your father's son. I don't patronize Shah Nurani. If I am a bastard, I am a bastard. But you might find me at the seaside shrine of Abdullah Shah Ghazi on a Thursday night, inhaling hashish among the malcontents who congregate on the rocky southern slant of the hill. It's always a carnival, populated by fortune tellers, bodybuilders, thugs, troubadours, transvestites, women, and sweet, sweet, rowdy children. I am at home there. When I enter the cool confines of Agha's supermarket to purchase smoked Gouda, however, shoppers part to give me way. Those who once knew me turn to memorize the sodium content in shelf cans of French onion soup. The last time I was dragging myself through the aisles, I called out to this busty 66-year-old Persian cat who had just celebrated her 55th birthday. Although married to a portly patrician now, she would be at the Olympics in the old days, making eyes at the young men with carnations fixed in their lapels. When I hooted "Sweetie," she paused for a moment, as if crossing off the loaf of bread on the list in her head. Verily, decency is dead or dying. I have been mulling a project, some permutation of the mytho-poetic legacy of Abdullah Shah Ghazi since the fateful day my father asked me to punctuate the following sentence: that is that is, and that is not, that is not. Naturally, I retorted, comma after the sixth word, sir. Papa could be difficult, but I knew then that he had in an indirect way communicated his aspiration to me to be a phenomenologist, even if he would deny it vehemently afterwards. There's no doubt in my mind that my mother, an aristocrat hailing from an erstwhile martial state in the north, would have encouraged the project when she entered a room. People squinted as if she were wrought of light. If I close my eyes, I can recall hers, sunny and blue, like the sea at Somniani. Married to a cousin at 17, the Khan of this or that Khanate, she ran away when she realized that he was only keen on hunting partridge. She met Papa at the Olympus in 29 when visiting an aunt twice removed for high tea. She had 5 sons with rhyming names: Hidayatullah, Bakaullah, Abdullah, Fazlullah, and Rahimullah. When Mummy passed, the family, the house of K, became fundamentally unglued. After retiring from the army as a major, Hidayatullah moved to a palatial residence in the suburbs featuring a diamond-shaped pool, while Bakaullah, once a card-carrying communist, emigrated to some dusty corner of the Near East where he reportedly runs a transportation and logistics concern. Fazlullah, aka Tony, my boon companion, left for university in the United States of America. Before squatting on our estate in Sindh, where he cultivates dames and produces wine, our very own vinos de la tierra. I'm certain I was Mummy's favorite. She raised me to be myself. I am not a bad man, but not good for much anymore. I am a fat man and an anxious one. The insides of my thighs chafe when I climb down the stairs from my quarters. I avoid loitering below because my youngest brother, Rahimullah, aka Babu, occupies the mezzanine with his twin-faced boys and plain moon-faced wife Nargis, a lass with all the charm of an opossum. The arrangement poses a bit of a problem because I love those children, those crazy little childoos. When they manage to break free, they sneak up on me like those ninja warriors and clamber atop my dome belly. We sing, cavort, creep up to the roof to observe the silently sundering clouds, the odd meteor. We startle the nesting crows and put the fear of God in their black hearts. And when their rasping protests ring through the still of the evening, Nargis the opossum comes bounding up the stairs. She does not approve. She changes the rules all the time. Rule number 1, no taking the children to the roof at night or during the day, the afternoon or at sunset. Rule number 2, no feeding the children walnuts or custard apples, chili chips, sugar wafers. Rule number 3, no singing Tom Jones to the children. Or Cliff Richard, Boney M, the Benjamin Sisters. And even though I cradled him in my arms, carried him on my shoulders, even though I taught him how to whistle, how to say thank you, tanku, he'd say, the aforementioned Babu is not an ally. Many years ago, he laughed when told I was a bastard. Like many, like most, he quietly judged me then, quietly judges me now. I don't care. A fortune teller named Sarbuland once told me, तुम लंबी रेस के घोड़े हो, i.e., you are the horse of the long race. But I am not the same man I was yesterday. Thank you.
Wonderful. Now, we obviously, from that reading, Karachi is a major character in this novel. And it's set in seedy modern-day Karachi, yet at the same time, we hark back to, conjures up a lost city of jazz bars and clubs and synagogues and hard-drinking Soviet delegates. So were you aiming to provide a social, cultural history of Karachi in this novel?
The selected works of Abdullah the Cossack began as a voice.
Right.
After my debut, it took me a few years to find my feet, literally and figuratively. And during that time, I found myself wandering around the streets of a city that I'm very familiar with, but a city which is, depending how you cut the numbers, the 6th largest in the world. And a city that keeps evolving so fast that there are neighborhoods today that weren't extant yesterday. During this time, I spent a lot of time in a canton of the city known as Garden East, where once upon a time Karachi's aristocracy resided. The likes of the royal house of Khairpur, the Alvis. Hatem Alvi was one of Karachi's early mayors. The old Hindu aristocracy of the city resided there. Down the road from Garden on Lawrence Road was Karachi's most prominent synagogue. And so in these meanderings, which were somewhat more aimless, I found a voice speaking to me. And that voice, it turned out, one night when I was loitering on the beach at Sea View, I sort of was compelled to return home and transcribe that voice on the paper. And the voice suggested what the story would become. So was I consciously trying to invoke the socio-cultural history of Karachi? I wouldn't know it, but somewhere in the back of my mind, the history had accumulated through stories, and that accumulation catalyzed this voice. So there's a discursive answer for your very brief question.
But there is a real palpable sense of melancholy in this novel, of a vanished, bygone part of Karachi. And were you trying to, was this an act of commemoration or commiseration that you were trying to do?
You know, large cities in the world, New York, London, have been rendered on the page for centuries. Even before I found myself meandering the streets of London, I was somewhat familiar with topographically with London because of Charles Dickens. And New York has been invoked in Bright Light's Big City by Walt Whitman, by Catcher in the Rye. Karachi is the sixth largest city in the world, and there's a lacuna in literature and in sociocultural history about such a large place. And so these are, you know, I do have these concerns, and the way this binary of commiseration or commemoration, I think, is reductive. It's you know, you have to think about the city in a more complicated way. Right. For instance, there was a time when Karachi was populated by a large Polish expatriate community. Turovich Saab was the head of the Air Force, and he came from that community. And there was an animate Jewish community which produced the likes of Moses Samok, Solomon Samok, these architects who have built some of the iconic buildings in Karachi. Karachi is defined by our local Jewish aesthetic. That's something we don't think about. Karachi is also arranged, for instance, around churches. If you think about, you look at Karachi from a bird's eye view, Karachi is arranged around churches. Now, that was a certain a certain cosmopolitanism, a post-colonial cosmopolitanism, which, in retrospect, we feel nostalgic about. But in a weird way, Karachi remains one of the most cosmopolitan cities, not only in Pakistan but in South Asia. So Karachi today is, one of the characters in the selected works of Abdullah the Cossack is a Goan lad.
Yeah.
My Nai, my Hajam, my Baba is...
Do you have one?
It takes a lot of work to maintain this hairstyle. My Baba is a Goan Catholic named Sylvester, right? So Goan history informs my day-to-day life today. In Karachi, you have these cantons that are populated exclusively by Hindus, and when there's Diwali or a festival, that these animate festivals, we go and participate. You can't do that so much in other swaths of this country. Karachi remains, and these are sort of more exotic, but there's no other city that has such a large Pathan population. Siraiki speakers.
I think it is the largest Pathan population.
It might, by numbers, bigger than Peshawar. So, I mean, Punjabis, Sindhis, Mohajirs, Balochi fishermen, that populate the coast, Kutch, and we think about, again, these binaries, Urdu speakers, and actually Karachi is a very Gujarati-speaking city, and the Gujaratis include Memans and Khojas and Parsis, and so, Karachi remains cosmopolitan in its own way today.
And obviously you had great fun in describing the decrepitude of Abdullah himself. I've just written down knees cracking like biscuits. I pass gas, it sounds like a bleat and smells like French onion soup. My pocked pallid thigh. My gait is laboured due to the girth of my thighs and the recurring gout in my knees. And let's not get on to the references about his piles. And really, he is the personification of Karachi in this novel. He's a decaying, dying soul. And his deteriorating physical condition is really a reflection of the city's body politic and the problems that plague it, really. And was this done on purpose? And how were you able to write about the aging process so well as a youthful man of 45? Unless you have piles yourself.
I could elucidate on the peculiar ailments that have begun afflicting me in recent years. Like I was diagnosed with a pinched nerve, and one novelist like to say that writing novels takes a psychological toll on you, but it actually also takes a physical toll. My neck is literally bent out of shape. But that's not what informed the construction of one Abdullah the Cossack. Abdullah the Cossack is can be thought of as a composite of the sorts of characters that I often fraternize with. Right? I think.
Who are these characters?
I think I lack. I fundamentally sort of, or in a way, I lack imagination. I can't write about something without living it. And once I began writing this my opus, I conducted research in a more sort of cogent way than I had, and I spent a lot of time in garden. I also spent a lot of time with the 90-year-old proprietor of one of the oldest extant hotels in Karachi. Extant in the way that it doesn't function as a hotel, but it is still standing. It's a 100-year-old hotel with a 90-year-old proprietor, and I had gone to meet him, and I conducted many I drew on oral archives and oral histories, and in that effort I went to meet the old proprietor, who sort of was having a bad day, and we exchanged some small talk, and he said, "Why don't you come back next week?" And when I returned next week, he said, why don't you just stop by again next week? And so for the next 7 years,
How long?
next 7 years, every Saturday, I would spend the afternoon chatting, not about history as such, chatting about the weather. And in Karachi, we have afflicted with our own peculiar political problems and so on. But that, so that is one such character that I spend time with. In garden, wandering around garden, I found myself on Chestnut Street once, and तुम उर्दू समझते हो, वहाँ बच्चे लौंडे थे, वो क्रिकेट खेल रहे थे सड़क पे, तो हमने पूछा ये किसका मकान है, तो उन्होंने कहा फ़लाँ का मकान है। तो मैंने सोचा कि फ़लाँ से मिलना ज़रूरी है, तो मैं घर गया, फ़लाँ का नंबर ढूंढा और उनके घर हम पहुंच गए। हमने कहा हम मुसन्निफ़ हैं और हम शहर पे लिख रहे हैं, और हम तो उन्होंने कहा मियाँ आपको आप क्या पूछना चाह रहे हैं? तो हमने कहा कि मिसालन आप बचपन में शहर में क्या करते थे? And you would think he would invoke cabarets and this and that, but he said बचपन में हम लोग जाते थे मलीर, वहाँ फार्म होते थे, तो एक टोंगा जो है, टोंगे पे बैठ के हम मलीर जाते थे, या हम ये सैंडस्पिट जाते थे, किश्ती से जाते थे. There was, it was actually sort of separated from the mainland by an inlet, and so there's also this very simplicity to the way that old denizens of Karachi entertain themselves, which is no longer possible because Karachi is overpopulated and the public spaces have shrunk, and so these are the sorts of stories that went into creating this world, went into creating Abdullah the Cossack.
You just said that you lacked imagination and that you had to draw heavily on real life experiences or personal stories, but
let's not get into piles again, huh?
But you have a wonderful character in this novel who's a contract killer, who's a goon, a mafia thug. How did you write about that with such detail and with such insight?
When my story meandered to a juncture where a contract killer was required, I called up a friend of mine who has a somewhat shady past, and he sort of makes commercials now and some TV, and wants me to write a script for him.
Right.
And so I called him up and I said, I need to meet some contract killers. And he said, it doesn't work like this. I'm sorry, I can't help you. I said,
It's not like a bootlegger.
yes. And I said, Mia, अगर तुम मेरे से ये काम चाहते हो कि मैं तुम्हारे लिए फिल्म लिखूं, तो तुम मेरा काम करोगे तो मैं तुम्हारा काम करूँगा. So one evening he told me to meet me at Seaview, and I thought that he would take me to a far-flung canton of the city, and I've been to many far-flung cantons with, sort of it's been tricky to traverse during the bright light of day. Gadap is a canton where kidnapping syndicates operated out of once upon a time. Liari is famously restive, has been famously restive. He took me to a house in Defence. It was.
Is that where they reside now?
And well, Defence, I find very peculiar in many ways. I find that neighbors don't know their neighbors.
Especially if they're contract killers.
It's a good friend to have.
Yes. Especially if the wife's
and there were these men sitting outside a modest two-story house, and I thought they were guards, but actually they had a divan set up on the green patch outside their house, and they were just sitting, drinking and smoking, and I was sort of quite tense and driving up to them, getting out. How do you make small talk with someone whose job it is?
How's work going?
Yeah. Nice breeze today. It's a little muggy.
Yeah.
And they were disarmingly charming and disarmingly amicable. And one wouldn't think
Yeah.
of them this way. They were hospitable. They offered us tea, and I require a point of departure, right? Fundamentally, when I say I need a point of departure, I don't. If I write a novel that features a contract killer, then as a novelist, it is my responsibility to sort of inhabit their head, to understand their psychology. But spending half an hour, 45 minutes with them, I found that I had neglected to think about how contract killers are also fathers and brothers and children, and you don't think of them that way. I mean, and so it was.
So how did you get inside their head?
Get inside the house.
Their head.
So as a point of departure, if I was writing a novel about a contract killer, I'd have to get inside their head. I needed to understand sort of that they, as they're depicted in the selected works, they are also people like you and me who like tea. And it sounds whimsical, and in a way it was very whimsical, but I've had a friend who was gunned down in his offices by contract killers. I have an uncle who was shot working as a doctor in Malir, and so that's I have had personal experience with what this line of business actually is. But it's another way that I had to think about them, not merely as machines, but in a more three-dimensional way.
Okay, great, thank you. Abdullah himself is a self-styled intellectual, polymath, outsider, a black sheep of the family, and to some extent you could say that about a writer. So did you draw on your own experiences when writing from Abdullah? Because really, writers aren't particularly socially acceptable in high society.
When I was writing Homeboy, I was, well, actually, I have been unemployed for by certain standards for close to 2 decades now, and so when I was writing Homeboy, I was very much a black sheep and inhabited a liminal space, and so yes, some of Abdullah's anxieties I share. Abdullah, despite his size and his physical ailments, is also, and as you suggest, perhaps an analog for the city. He is fundamentally somebody who shares anxieties that we all have. And the most basic anxiety that Abdullah shares, and perhaps I share, is that how do you live a life of meaning?
Yeah, I've got the exact quote here. You write, or Abdullah writes, there are few conjunctures that stupefy, that unsettle the soul more than the thought of a fallow life. So presumably that's a real fear for you as well as for Abdullah.
And George, I'm sure that
It's fair for me. Yeah.
yeah, and and some people think of it once a year. Perhaps on your birthday, perhaps on New Year. Some people think about it every day. I don't recommend that because that's a recipe for disaster. But this, Abdullah has real anxieties about how does one negotiate one's time in the best way.
Now, obviously, there is a love interest in the book, Jugnu, and I don't want to get into that in too much detail because I don't want to reveal that. But how did you go? I mean, she's quite a mysterious female character, and how did you go about writing about her?
So, I sketched out the first scene for you and for everybody here, that Abdullah, when he wakes up on his 70th birthday, feels that he's led a life without meaning and consequently considers launching himself off his balcony. And what gives him pause is the gaze, a mysterious gaze that he feels boring into him through the interstices of the trees that border his compound. And when he goes down to investigate, the gaze disappears, and mercifully the thought passes, and then the novel begins. And one wouldn't give away much by saying that Abdullah is reunited with the gaze.
Yes.
And the gaze belongs to a mysterious young woman, and who Abdullah finds himself falling in love with. And in a way, one could make a claim that he, in this attempt to find meaning in his life, he fills that vacuum with love. The hope for love, just the hope for love. Just, he says that just some attention is enough, and perhaps that's enough.
Right. Yeah. I think I'm wary of time now, so I think we'd like to open it up for questions. So, do we have a microphone available? And can I ask anybody if they have a question for H M Naqvi?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shafiq. I'm an HR professional from the telecom sector. My question is not particularly about your book, but the profession of writing. George mentioned that you were a full-time banker. You were associated with the World Bank before, and then you became a writer. So how do you make that transition from a full-time banker or full-time professional to a full-time writer? How difficult or easy it is, if you could shed light on that. Thank you.
भाई हम जो हैं रईसज़ादे नहीं हैं, ना हमारा कोई कारोबार है, ना कोई ज़मीनें हैं, तो हमें अब ज़माने में अपने पैरों पे खड़ा होना पड़ा और हम खड़े हुए। लिखते तो हम बचपन से आ रहे हैं, मगर कोई लिखाई में, नसर में कोई आपको कोई ख़ास कमाई नहीं है। तो ये एक तरह से मुश्किल सवाल है, इसलिए कि ये देयर इज़ नो आपका हाथ पकड़ के कोई आपको वो नसर की तरफ या इस शोबे मुसन्निफ़ बनने में कोई आपका कोई हाथ नहीं देगा। सो it's not something I advocate. It's actually, I would discourage people to think about moving from a profession that brings bread and butter on your table to something like what kind of thing that I do. I think the best way of going about it is हमारे दोस्त जैसे अब्दुल्ला हुसैन साहब रहे। जब भी वो कराची आते थे वो हमारे साथ एक शाम गुजारते थे। वो उर्दू में शायद उनसे बड़े, जब तक वो हयात थे उनसे बड़ा कोई मुसन्निफ़ नहीं रहा है। सो अब्दुल्ला हुसैन, गॉड ब्लेस हिम, ran a off license which is in London. Off license में आप वो शराब बेची 30 साल हैं। उससे पहले वो इंजीनियर थे। तो कोई कमाई तो उनकी किताबें अभी तक बिकती हैं और बिकती रहेंगी। उदास नस्लों से हमारी ज़बान में शायद कम ही नावल हैं। तो अब्दुल्ला हुसैन से जब मतलब एक मिसाल है कि इतने बड़े मुसन्निफ़, he had ways of complementing his income, and so on. मैं तार साहब की मिसाल दे सकता हूँ बहुत। And so one should never think about transitioning because it's you're setting yourself up for fall.
Okay, anybody else for a question? Yes, this lady at the front.
I just wondered, you've told us about how you go about selecting your characters, and you like to write from what you know. And I just wondered, with the end result, how would you describe your style? Is it a stream of consciousness? How do you move from the beginning through to the denouement?
The style is, it's a very compelling style. And I highly recommend the selected works of Abdullah the Cossack. You know, novelists are configured differently. So there are novelists that outline a story. And so before embarking on the business of writing, they sketch out the story on a notepad and work from that. I don't work like that. Dan Brown does, and I wish I could sell like Dan Brown. But I allow the character to take me to places that I haven't been in, and situations that I want to explore. And so halfway through a novel, I don't really know what the hell is going on.
So do you write linear?
Yeah. So, but I write 300 words a day, right?
Right.
which is not much at all. It's about 2-3 paragraphs. I don't really revise those 200-300 words a day, and the story progresses incrementally in that way. And it's not till about halfway through the novel that I realize that I can sort of see the end at the horizon. And so it's an organic process for me. I wish I wish there was more clarity. I wish I wasn't fumbling around the darkness half the time. But that's the way I know how. That's the only way I know how to do it.
Great. Anybody else?
Assalamu alaikum. I want to ask a question from you, sir. The question is that when you write something, you have a lot of experiences and maybe you're full of experiences and you want them to come out. But the thing is, for a writer, do you think it is the element is motivation in that person or frustration to make your experiences be known to the world and everything? Thank you.
ये मज़े का सवाल है, इसलिए कि मोटिवेशन भी होती है, फ्रस्ट्रेशन भी होती है. You know, this is something that हम बचपन से किताबें पढ़े आ रहे हैं, मतलब और तो you know experiences भी हैं, और and one has been an avid reader since one was a child. हमारा ख़ानदान, हमारी जो रिवायत है उसमें बड़ी अहमियत दी जाती है अदब को, शायरी को. तो ये हमारी ख़ानदानी भी मसला है. वो कीड़ा जो है उसने बचपन ही में काटा था. तो वो, but there's no, you know, there's no manual to complete a novel, and so there is a great deal of frustration, but at the same, there's a great deal of frustration, and I mean, you know, I don't want to bore you with the ennui and the great you know, sort of issues one contends with, but one is also at the same time motivated to put pen to paper every single day. And I, for one, derive my self-worth from the sentences that I write every day. It's about self-worth. The days I don't write, I actually feel worthless.
Goodness. And do you actually put pen to paper, or is it laptop?
अब वो हम अब रिवायत माशरा बदला है, रिवायतें बदली हैं, अब हम लैपटॉप इस्तेमाल करते हैं. पुराना सा घिसा पटा है हमारा एक लैपटॉप है. वहाँ पीछे एक सवाल.
Naqvi Sahab, thank you and congratulations for your book. I have a question. You wrote about a Desi character, Abdullah, who lives in Karachi, right? So is it like writing in English is sort of you are more comfortable with it, and many of the other authors write about Desi characters in English rather than in Urdu. So is it like a personal choice for you, or you more make it more comfortable for you to write in English?
हमें इतनी सलाहियत नहीं है हम कि हम उर्दू में नसर लिखें. तो it's not as much a choice for me. हम मज़े से पढ़ते हैं, और कुछ ऐसे नावल हैं जो नहीं पढ़ पाते. हम आग का दरिया मिसालन नहीं पढ़ पाएंगे. मंटो साहब की कहानियाँ हम पढ़ लेंगे. हम नासिर काज़मी की शायरी पढ़ लेंगे, मगर हम नक्श फरियादी पढ़ने में बड़ी दिक्कत होती है. So, you know, and philosophically, I think that philosophically, I think English in the subcontinent dates back to 1795. It dates back famously to one Deen Muhammad from Patna, who wrote the first was the first South Asian to write a book in English. And वो हमने ज़बान जो है अब अपना लिए, और जब हम लिखते हैं हम अपनी I put my stamp on the English language. This is, you know, and तो ये किसी और की नहीं है, ये ज़बान जो है हमने अपनी अपना ली है, और कोई लिख के दिखाए ऐसे कि मतलब हम जो हैं, जो हमारी पुश्त के जो ये नावल निगार हैं, they've put their stamp on the language just like Nigerians have, just like Indians have, and why shouldn't we?
I just wanted to mention here that obviously one thing that for those who haven't read the book, and I highly recommend you do, is that this is essentially a memoir of its protagonist, and it contains footnotes that provide historical context. And here I would argue, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, the voice of the Cossack, Abdullah, and that of you, H M Naqvi, sort of become one, or prodding readers to explore the city's lost narratives and delightful obscurities. Is that a fair assessment?
It's fair to say, George, that there's some of me in Abdullah and some of Abdullah in me. So there,
but specifically the footnotes, I felt that's where your voice shone the loudest.
The footnotes, since it's a memoir, if you and I, and you know, everybody at some juncture of one's life in this, considers writing a memoir or some of their thoughts about, and I was thinking with Abdullah that if you and I were to write a memoir, we would require footnotes, and because you can't explain everything in the text, there are the other facets of it. So that's how I think about the footnotes. The book functions without the footnotes, but of course you're asking me something somewhat different, and you'll have to just accept that there's some of me in him and some of him in me.
Thank you. Any other questions?
One there.
Yes, the gentleman at the back there. I think it's a gentleman, I hope.
Yes, you are right. सर मैं कराची में था इसी हफ्ते, तो हमें खुदा की बस्ती मिला, चाकीवाड़ा में मिसाल मिला, तो उस तरह की चीज़ें अब हमें क्यों नहीं मिलती? अब कराची के रहने वाले
कता कलामी माफ़, अब आप पूछ रहे हैं कि इस तरह की किताबें क्यों नहीं लिखी जाती?
जी अब
इसलिए कि मोहम्मद खालिद अख्तर जो हैं वो गुजर गए, अब वो चाकियावाड़ा में अब क्या उसका उन्वान क्या है?
चाकीवाड़ा में विसाल
चाकियावाड़ा में अब विसाल भी शायद मुमकिन नहीं है, वहाँ चाकियावाड़ा जो है ऐसा बदला है. मगर आई थिंक दोज आर टू वेरी गुड, दोज आर टू एक्सलेंट एग्जाम्पल्स ऑफ बुक्स दैट आर सेट इन कराची. मगर अब हम जितना हमारे नज़दीक अब वो है ही नहीं, तो वो कैसे लिखेंगे कोई?
और सर दूसरा ये है कि उर्दू अदब का जो बेहतरीन आगाज़ हुआ वो बेशक कराची से ही हुआ, लेकिन अब अगर पूछा जाए तो कि उर्दू का कत्ल किसने किया, तो कराची वाले कहते हैं हमने करा.
कत्ल? जी
कत्ल. तो कराची वाले कहते हैं कि हमने करा. उधर जाएं तो उधर उर्दू और है और इधर उर्दू और है, तो ये फ़र्क हमें आप इसको एलेबोरेट क्यों नहीं करते? थैंक यू.
उर्दू का मियाँ कत्ल जो है वो हम नहीं कर सकते. Urdu, whether one likes it or not, is the lingua franca of Pakistan. You can go to Peshawar and speak Urdu. You can go to Quetta and speak Urdu. वहाँ शायद क्वेटा में पंजाबी ज़बान से बलोची मुतासिर नहीं है, तो वहाँ मसला बन सकता है अगर आप जाके वहाँ पंजाबी बोलें. तो Urdu is whether we like it or not, the lingua franca of Pakistan, सिंध में आप जाएं और आप नॉर्थ इंडिया और नॉर्थ इंडियन ले लें, वो अपने वो ज़बान को जो भी कहें, वो हिंदुस्तानी कहें क्या कहें, मगर उर्दू बोलते हैं, बॉलीवुड में उर्दू बोली जाती है. तो इस पूरे खित्ते की एक तरह से ज़ाहिर है southern India has its own traditions, very old traditions, but there's a broad swath of the south of the subcontinent where the lingua franca is Pakistan is Urdu. उसको कत्ल कैसे कर सकते हैं? मतलब आप या तो इस खित्ता जो है वो सैलाब आ जाए, अब और सुना है कि अब मौसम ऐसा बदल रहा है कि सैलाब आएंगे, तो शायद फिर उर्दू जो है मिट जाए, मगर हम ये मतलब जिसका भी ये ख्याल है ये कम ज़र्फ़ ख्याल है.
Yes, this lady at the front here. Just if you could wait for the microphone so everyone.
And one more.
Yeah, you can go later. Yeah.
My question is that Mr. Naqvi, you have lived all your life in the different capitals of the world, and you've mentioned that Karachi is the 6th major city of this world also. So what attracted you, having lived in all these mega big cities like London and New York, to write about Karachi? And then having written about Karachi, do you think you have done justice to that city? I like your views on that, please.
I don't think one novel can do justice to Karachi. Karachi is so large with so many different narratives that it'd be foolish. It'd be a foolish ambition to try to depict the city on the page. Like Mohammad Khalid Akhtar's excellent Love in Chakiawara, जिसका बिलाल तनवीर ने बड़ा ज़बरदस्त तर्जुमा किया है, जो अगर आपने नहीं पढ़ी है वो पढ़नी ज़रूरी है. You know, that's these you know, Khuda ki Basti, there are different stories that comprise the mythology of the city. So I hope I'm not the last person, and Karachi will continue producing. और अब जो है हाल में अंग्रेज़ी अदब में कराची और किलिंग मी है, बिलाल तनवीर की स्कैटर हियर इज़ सो ग्रेट है, हमारे दोस्त उमर शाहिद हामिद की शायद चार किताबें जो हैं वो कराची में वाक़ हैं. तो अब जो है कराची से Karachi has finally found a place in the literary imagination, which wasn't the case maybe even 10 years ago. So my book contributes to this, but it's not the end. बेशक मगर कराची की तारीख खुदा की बस्ती से जी किशोर
मैंने कहा कि मैं 300 लफ्ज़ रोज़ाना लिखता हूँ
जी.
ये मैकेनिकल तरीका,
ये सब किशोर सबके लिए
नहीं, 300 लफ्ज़ रोज़ाना लिखना क्या मैकेनिकल नहीं हो जाता?
आप शायरा हैं तो आप जो हैं वो आमद आप पे जब आती है तो आप लिखती होंगी.
ये मेरा मसला है. अपना मसला
हम जो हैं हमें सिर्फ शुरू में ये हमारी कैफियत सिर्फ ये शुरू में होती है. जो पहले चंद सफ़े हैं हमारी पहली किताब के या दूसरी किताब पे के वो कभी बदले नहीं, और वो मुख्तसर से 3-4 सफ़े हैं जिनमें हमें ये आमद आई. बाकी जो है सब मैकेनिकल है. I'm almost like a carpenter, and I've got to hammer every day because I don't know what I'm making, and it takes a lot of work. And if I stop hammering, I will lose the momentum that I have. So जैसे हमने कहा everybody works differently. अगर हम 300 लफ्ज़ ना लिखें तो हमारी किताब ना मुकम्मल होनी है और हम जाती मसले जो हैं वो बढ़ जाएंगे हल हो जाते हैं.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid that is all we have time for. I'd just like to thank H M Naqvi for his presence here today and for discussing the selected works of Abdullah the Cossack. We thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've just been asked to say all the sessions are going live on the Facebook page of Electronic Diaries. So if you want to catch any of the sessions, please check that out. Until then, okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.